Once upon a time, two friends joined forces to bring you the best in horror entertainment. Brian from the north, Tim from the south, each bringing their own unique perspective to the horror community. Movie reviews, Blu-ray releases, beer pairings, games, and more. Welcome to your new home for horror. This is Civil Gore.
So we have here with us tonight one of our favorite people to talk all kinds of 80s stuff with, our good friend David Weiner. So welcome to the show, David. How you been?
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Always happy to be here, but I really enjoy chatting with you guys. So, I just come up with movies just as an excuse to talk with you, really.
Yeah, we appreciate it because we actually, yeah, you and I have had like other conversations where we'll just go on Twitter back and forth. And so many times if I'll like see something 80s like really cool and everything, I'm like, I got to show this to David. I got to make sure he sees this or something. And I know our meme game is strong back and forth too. We have
and a shared upbringing point of reference, which I think makes it super cool for me.
Yeah. And I think we shared that with our listeners before, where you and I grew up like about 10 minutes away from each other and visited all the same spots and everything. And so that's always fun when we reminisce about that, because it's so different. I don't know if you've been to that area lately, but it's almost unrecognizable. But
yeah, it's been a while. All I know is that some of the landmarks that I went to, that I used to frequent growing up, were so pivotal in my lifetime. The Scarsdale Plaza, the 99-cent theater where there was a new movie every week. It was like the, what was left of a movie print before it went to movie print heaven,
Yeah.
But that was like, I saw some of the greatest movies ever made, at that place. And, just some of the places, Hartsdale and that area, Crazy Eddie, we cross paths in a lot of the same area. Movie Land in Central Plaza in Yonkers,
Movie
New
Land,
York, all that kind of stuff,
Yep. And that it's funny that Crazy Eddie too is I still remember going in there because they used to have, it was one of the few places back then where they'd have displays set up of the video games. Like I remember playing. That's where I would play Casey Munchkin. Remember that from Odyssey 2?
Yeah.
Like I remember I'd always see the commercial for it, and no one I knew had the Odyssey 2, but.
Well, no, refresh my memory. Was Odyssey or Odyssey 2 or one and the same? The one where you had the plastic film that you would put on the TV using the static electricity to keep it on there.
Oh, that was Vectrex.
Vectrex? Well, Vectrex, I know it was an early Odyssey. Maybe.
Oh, maybe they had that too. I don't know, because the only reason I remember that is a friend of mine, when we shared an apartment about maybe, oh my God, now it's maybe like 15 years ago. Maybe even longer, maybe like 18 years ago, actually. Now he bought a whole bunch of old classic systems, and we put it kind of in the corner on this old little TV that he had. And so we had this like little classic video game section. But he also bought a Vectrex, and he had that there. The Odyssey 2 is the one thing we always seem to never be able to kind of find online in any kind of good shape. But we had our ColecoVision there and stuff.
Right. Some of these early games. Well, the thing I was talking about, for those who aren't in the know, which I don't expect anyone to know unless you were around when fire was invented and the wheel first, when it became popular. But if you play Pong or tennis, there was literally a static electricity screen of two people playing tennis on a big green court, and you just like put that on the TV, so you have a better sense of, we're playing tennis. Or they had a haunted house game where they had this amazing, cool animated haunted house, but all the haunted house was like moving little dots, and you just had to find the ghost and find whatever treasure or find whatever you had to. But it looked nothing like a haunted house. But as soon as you put that overlay over, you were immediately like, exploring a haunted house. And I think fond memories of that.
I think Microvision was kind of like that. Remember that? The first like handheld system where the whole overlay was the cartridge.
Right.
And, and I remember I had that one. That was one of the systems I had as a kid. And I remember it was the most basic thing. It was literally like squares, but they made the most of what for what it showed. It was at the time. It's like, so it's so funny. Like that, nowadays you literally, like on your watch, you can be playing games if you want.
Sure.
It's like, I mean, you could then too. I remember I had that Pac-Man watch that everyone had.
Right. They had, as soon as these Texas Instruments watches and stuff came out, I think you could play like what Space Invaders, or I guess you could play Pac-Man, but that was a novelty. You know, these were our
calculator
big
watch.
like exactly our big dreams. You
Yeah.
know, we couldn't believe it. I used to fantasize when I was like in 7th grade, you know, that because I get bored in class. I'm like, all right, if only I had the world's smallest television on my watch as a watch, and I could watch like Planet of the Apes episodes or something like that. And well, now you can.
I know it's amazing. Like now that we have all this stuff, it's like you go from like the biggest thing down back to small, then you want to get bigger again, then you want to get. It's just you can't decide which size we want of anything anymore. You know,
it's all about portability versus visibility.
Exactly. And it's so funny. I love that. Like actually right now was one of my favorite times because we actually have, you know, when you get like, I still love physical media. So I love getting the Blu-ray, but also with the digital copy. So I can have the Blu-ray to display, but watch it on my iPad or my phone or
right. The portability and the convenience versus the, there's something about holding a tangible something in your hand, you know, seeing the art, you know, it's your library, you know, you've got your books and you've got your VHS, you've got your Blu-rays, you got your DVD, whatever it may be. It's so different than like when you have to sort of scroll through Netflix or scroll through HBO Max or whatever you are, even Tubi. I mean, there's all this great content, but when there's so much there, it's nice owning and having and the thing is we all forget that this stuff is not permanent. When Netflix first came out, I started selling a bunch of my DVDs because I'm like, well, it's all online, always there.
Yeah.
And then I remember, I can't remember what the title was, but I remember I went to go look at something and I'm like, where is it? And that's when I realized it's temporal and they rotate these things. And so nothing's permanent. I thought it was just a growing library online, but you know, I was sorely mistaken. And now I value the physical media that much more because I know if I can't find it, I always have it.
Yeah, and even the digital copies like that you own, they have a little disclaimer that they could actually, if they lose the rights or something to it, you don't own it anymore. It's like, so
right.
That's why it's like, to me, it's like, I don't mind having the digital library, but I want to have that physical media with it. You know,
well,
I like
remember
the box.
Ultraviolet, you know, Ultraviolet was the digital, you know, to prevent piracy, they had Ultraviolet, and I think all the Warner Brothers stuff and a lot of Universal was Ultraviolet. And I got a bunch of stuff that was on Ultraviolet, and then one day you get that little email that you may or may not have caught saying, "Oh, Ultraviolet is going away."
It's like you can transfer as much as you can. Yeah. I still remember that panic mode, and then I remember when everything switched to Movies Anywhere, and then. Then Voodoo,
and then you couldn't find movies anywhere. It was Movies Somewhere, but I don't even know where that is now.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crazy to try to capture. Like I have between that and I have Voodoo, and I still have my Apple thing. Some of them are all on all three, but some of them are only on Voodoo. And
not a fan. All I know is that if iTunes goes away, then I lose a very sizable library.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'll definitely lose a lot from there, I think, because there's some stuff that just never transferred. No matter how hard I try and connect it, you know, you go fiddle in the settings, it still doesn't take everything, and I don't know why, but it's crazy. But and it's funny,
first world problems, right?
Yeah. And if people didn't know, you and I were secretly pitching, right? The In Search of Video Games, your next
that's right? Exactly.
Yeah. But
and that's what Creator VC is doing is the first thing that they're still filming right now, but they are filming is FPS, first person shooter, which is a documentary on FPS games. Nice. And we still have In Search of Pixels in development. So
nice. So while I was joking, I'm really not, you know.
Right. No, we're, you know, Robin Block, who is the CEO of Creator VC, and all our movies that we do, Last Action Heroes, Last Starfighter. In Search of Darkness, In Search of Tomorrow. He is doing his best to expand and cater to fan demand and ideas and excitement. And so it's getting very cool because all the stuff that we've done up until now, where we're putting out In Search of Tomorrow out now, we've engendered this wonderful trust in the content that we're doing, and it's enabling us to diversify now. So the more you guys are, supporting us in any way, shape, or form by spreading the word, or following us, or part of our Discord, whatever it may be, the more we get to diversify with the entertainment and the type of stuff we do. So it's pretty cool.
That's great. Well, perfectly leading into what I was going to say is, so you've been kind of busy lately with that little project there you call In Search of Tomorrow. So if you've been living under a rock and not listening to our show, why don't you tell everybody what that one is about? I mean, I'm sure they know, if they're avid listeners, they know, but we get some new listeners from time to time, so they might not be familiar with it. And I want to make sure they're all on board with this cool project you got.
Yeah. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and these days, in the past, I was editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. I worked for Entertainment Tonight for many years before that. Written for the Hollywood Reporter and LA Weekly and other. Moved from journalism to entertainment journalism to documentary filmmaking. These days, I'm making these long form documentaries that really kind of capture a snapshot of what a decade is all about. And so In Search of Darkness, part 1 and part 2, and we're working on part 3, is all about 80s horror. And the structure is that it goes from 1980 to 1989. In each year, we cover a number of films and do a deep dive into a bunch of films. But then in between, we have larger context chapters and topics in between to sort of break it up as a little palate cleanser and give more depth to the decade. And we've moved that structure over from horror to sci-fi. And so now I just did a film called In Search of Tomorrow, which is all about 80s sci-fi and genre films that range from, Star Wars and Star Trek to Back to the Future to Mad Max, but, the what if genre, the science, fiction and fact, Bill and Ted, Short Circuit, War Games. If it was a very cool 80s movie and it had a sci-fi bent to it, then we're covering it, we're talking about it, so everything from Saturn III to Howard the Duck to E.T. to Blade Runner, there's just so many amazing titles, and this charts the progression of that filmmaking and what that was about and how it was responding to the real world times.
Yeah, I think actually one of my favorite things, I do love the way you have and all your documentaries are the same, how you have you have the segmented years, but the little focus things amongst the years that you have. And in this one, I don't want to give anything away because I want people to watch this, but I like the some of the topics you picked on that you focused on. And actually it's funny, you were like, as always, we have such a good rapport. I think you always like lead into the next question I'm going to ask so perfectly, because what I was going to ask is because, science fiction, as everyone knows, it kind of is one of those genres that kind of bleed into others. Obviously we know a lot, there's a million sci-fi horror ones in there. There's also a lot of sci-fi fantasy. So what do you feel about a movie truly makes it science fiction? Because that's always arguments you have with people all the time, and I'd love to hear.
Yeah, there's like, I mean, you could spend hours saying is Star Wars sci-fi or fantasy, and there's valid arguments for each. I ultimately felt like if you really wanted to get very hardcore about the definition of sci-fi, I think you limit yourself in terms of what these movies, what movies were offered during the decade. It doesn't mean I'm cheating, but I think it's like, I had to focus on, well, is the, Mad Max is the post-apocalyptic genre. Does that qualify as sci-fi? What defines sci-fi? Is sci-fi about technology, or is sci-fi about sort of, the what if cautionary tales of our future or of our present? And so does War Games fit in there? War Games is really, it's really a drama and a thriller, but there is that what if, the computer decides to start World War III, started by a kid and his, computer, just his own personal computer playing a game, that kind of thing like that, but it goes into the realm of sci-fi. enough where I think it's a very important, I keep on coming back to the war games, it seems, but it's like it's a reflection of the times and the Cold War, and Russia's going to nuke us any minute kind of thing, and the superpowers facing off. That was very, very much in our face during those times. And I think
that was my living nightmare back then. That's all I was afraid of. It's like you figure War Games as a movie that shouldn't really be any kind of frightening element to it, but if you look at what, and I think I read somewhere too once that was supposed to be a little bit like more serious, I guess, when it was supposed to come out. I don't remember where I read that, but yeah, right. But even they ended up doing it in such a lighthearted way, but it's still, it's like that. At the movie at the time, like I was growing up, that time of period, everyone was afraid of a nuclear war happening. So anytime you saw a movie that touched on that, there was a bit of like, whoa, no, I don't care how lighthearted it is, it's a little nerve-wracking.
Right, and it didn't even have to be sci-fi. I mean, all these movies, whether it was Rambo battling the Russians in Afghanistan and Rambo 3, or Rocky versus Draco, in Rocky 4. There's two Stallone references there, but or Red Dawn, the first PG-13 movie,
right,
that we got, where we got invaded. This was on our minds all the time in terms of the Cold War, and it's really, really sad that when I was doing this and I was sort of revisiting all these movies and reminded of how prevalent those themes were in a lot of these films in the 80s. We've sadly kind of come full circle, and there's a whole new generation who's just like, well, better come hold the hands of the Gen Xers. We'll teach you. There's some meme going around now where like, all right, we'll hold your hand and we'll show you how to eat a cold, untoasted Pop-Tart out of foil, to get you through this tough time, but that's kind of what we lived with.
Yeah. Well, yeah, lately, all I've been seeing is I don't think I can scroll more than like 10 seconds without seeing the Red Dawn meme. To the last few days, which is
and let me clarify, just because we're making light of all this stuff, it's you could either laugh or you could cry. And I think what's going on is really awful. And
it's rough to go through, especially for people that we kind of seeing it. This is not our first time through it, and seeing this stuff, but that's what I think is so fascinating about the sci-fi genre, that it really does blend into so many things, especially the 80s, because I think 80s were just, we always say that it was a special time. It had so many different elements to it. So it's like, anytime you focus on anything from the 80s, it always has this special like tilt to it. I think, that, you've kind of like, wow, it's like, we were actually living this then. And then it's funny because the 80s had this vision of the future, with their sci-fi, that like we're now looking at it and we see how much stuff is actually like pretty close with
a lot of well, and that's what's interesting about, a lot of people like to sort of go to Star Trek and they look at, the first flip phones and the people who created those were clearly inspired by Star Trek communicators. There's lots of future tech that was science fiction then that is reality now. Especially everything with, everything from, Boston Dynamics creating robots that I'm still a little wary of, that, I think are one step away from Skynet to, just to drones, if you look at, Michael Crichton's work, and he wrote and directed Runaway, with Gene Simmons and Tom Selleck. A lot of the tech in there, was very prescient at the time. And, I think, whether it was a James Bond movie with some gadgets or whether it was something that felt like it was, full on sci-fi, a lot of it has come to pass, especially with, the Apple watches that we wear on our wrists now, and the computers in our pockets. We love it, we appreciate it, but we break them and we take them for granted to a certain extent too, all the time. The technology is here, and so this movie asks also, in addition to the movies, it talks about some of this technology as well, and does it help or hinder our lives?
And one of the funny,
what direction, we're headed with it.
Yeah, no, and one of the funny things to do if you want to do something weird, really weird in full circles, like you take Star Trek 4, right? And there's always one of my favorite scenes in that is where they go back, to back into to San Francisco, and and Scotty goes to computer, he's like, computer, and he talks into the mouse. And back then, everyone thinks it's so funny because, in the future, you're talking to the computer. And now we sit and look at that now and we're like, oh my God. I remember the time when we couldn't talk into a computer and couldn't turn our lights on, with a voice, it's hilarious.
Well, even with Star Trek: The Next Generation, everywhere they walked, they always had these touchpads. They basically walked around with iPads in like 1987, 1988. The fact that has come to pass where we use that kind of stuff all the time, and just it's always baby steps, and then everyone has it, and then you don't think twice about it. But just the concept of being able to touch your computer screen and type on your computer screen, that is sci-fi. I mean, I feel like I sound like an old man now, because everyone is just like, yeah, of course you can. But hello, that was sci-fi for us,
The closest thing we had were those little drawing, like an Etch-a-Sketch or one of those drawing things where you'd lift the paper up, remember? Oh,
they sell Etch-a-Sketches now, and I don't know if it's I think it's half meant to be a joke and half meant to be serious. But they, you walk in Target and they have sort of these vintage retro toy section, and they have Etch-a-Sketches. But the packaging on the Etch-a-Sketch says something to the effect of "No Wi-Fi necessary." No Wi-Fi needed. Great. Because they look at that and they're like, "Oh, it's like an iPad or something like that." Does it need batteries? Does it need Wi-Fi? No, you need sand and to be able to shake it.
What you want to hear something, this to me just cracked me up. So for my niece and nephew, they're big into Paw Patrol. And so when I saw that they, those new Arcade 1-Up series, they have they have a kid's size one, they have a kid's Pac-Man and a kid's Paw Patrol. So being the uncle that I am that has to spoil my niece and nephew, I bought them for Christmas. I bought them the Paw Patrol arcade game. And so we happened to be out there. We flew out there to visit, and we set it up for them, and we out there, and it was the cutest and funniest thing at the same time. We turned it on, and initially my niece goes like this, starts tapping the screen to try and get it to go because she's used to her iPad. Right. I mean, and she's 5 years old, and she's used to touching the screen. And we're trying to teach her, so no, this is like what Daddy and Uncle Brian used to do. We used to have to use this little controller here.
See, all the way down here, this handle controls all the way up there. Believe it or not, they're connected.
Yeah. Well, and she is so smart. So she, after a few minutes, she picked it up and knew exactly what she was doing. But it was hilarious that like in our day and age, we would have thought that was so foreign to touch a screen and have anything happen. And here, this generation at 5 years old is like looking at it as so archaic. I just thought of that scene for Back to the Future 2. Remember? Oh, it's a baby's toy. You have to touch it. You have to hold it. And it's just hilarious. But so, and speaking of this documentary, so I have to say this thing, when I got this, you sent me the screener for this, and this thing is close to 5 hours long. So I can't even imagine how you would go into deciding what to keep, what not to keep. So I have to know, without going into, you don't have to go to details of what you kept and didn't keep, but like, how do you go about that process? Do you have like a group of like a think tank that going in and you vote? Like,
yeah, well, we don't have a think tank. It actually comes down to me. And so, I agonize over the final cut because I really have to keep, believe it or not, 5 hours is chopped down from another hour beyond that. But what ultimately happens is I really kind of weigh what people love, what is eclectic, what is unheard of, what needs to be in, because everyone's going to say, well, why isn't that in there? And you kind of weigh it all in, and there's sort of a mathematical equation, all this. So I kind of I outline all the movies of the year. I outline all the details within a chapter that I want to cover. And then I start going to recruiting people and talent and people who are part of these movies. They wrote it, or they directed, or they composed it, or they starred in it, or they did the effects in it, or they're an expert on it. And ultimately it's very, 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 very tough. And you look at a year like, 1982, which is like the ultimate geek year,
Yeah.
where so many amazing movies came out. Ironically, 1984 has even more. And 1984 was a jam-packed year, and there were I put together some segments that I ultimately cut reluctantly, but I realized that the difference between this movie and In Search of Darkness movies is that this In Search of Darkness, the movies that we cover, the way I do it, it's a little more of an emotional, visceral connection to it. And you can sort of cut to the chase a little faster. Whereas there's something that, there's definitely the emotional punch that all these movies have, especially with the nostalgic connection to it for In Search of Tomorrow. But there's a little more of an intellectual context and explanation that's required. So they need a little more time. And by doing that, all of these segments are a little longer, and so they take up more time. And next thing you know, you're like, I gotta cut out more movies. What do I cut out? If this movie does well, then I could do In Search of Tomorrow Part 2, and I could keep. There's so many movies that came out in this decade. I could keep on going with some of the titles that you wish were in there. And
yeah, I'm hoping for a part 2 because like I enjoyed this one so much. And this thing, I want to tell the listeners again too. This is, you go into, like, I was like, that was my day. I was planned. I told my wife, I said, okay, I am going to watch this thing. I wanted to sit through the whole thing, sit through it all. I had my coffee, I had some snacks, and I'm like, this is it. And this was like,
you didn't have the beer because it's gonna fall. You're gonna fall asleep. You need that caffeinated jolt.
Yeah, no, I had the beer later, but I had the, but yeah, no, and I love it because it's just, it was like, I think I told Tim, I'm trying to get the exact quote right that I told him. I said it was like watching my childhood blended into this perfect cocktail, because there were so many movies and so many topics and things that I remember. I mean, even this one affected me even more than, it's funny because we're a horror podcast, and I've been a horror fan, but I think those movies in, and those type of 80s, I think definitely represented the 80s more as a decade. And so I think it was just so many, there's so many things that just reminded me of, I mean, the different toys that went with it, the video games, it went with it, and it's like, so it was like, it was just 5 hours of pure like nostalgia that like was that I cannot, like, I don't think I could recommend it any higher of that. Like, if you were from the 80s, this is going to be your like step back through the 80s, as almost like as if you were time traveling, which is one of the topics of every sci-fi movie at some point. For every film.
One of the fun things about this is that, we can make so many references within the movies that we're talking about, or especially when we're talking about these other chapters where you can cover several movies and ideas. And the thing is, it doesn't always have to be just the 80s. You can sort of bounce around a little bit, just to explain what's going on and tell your tale and give some context with some of the movies that were inspirations to other movies as well. And I think that sort of gives a more rounded build up to why these movies were so important. And but I was going to say that, it's easy to sort of make a quick reference and show a poster or a video, a VHS box cover or a video store commercial, or something like that, or even just like, the popcorn snack trailer that we would see in movie theaters, just it has this sort of sense memory to all this stuff that takes you back.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things I love that you do, and you do this in all of your In Search of documentaries, which is my favorite thing, is because you always want your favorite movie to be shown or a certain movie to be seen. And I love how you have that always that edit where you go in and you kind of see all the titles like in like little poster forms or box art, and you're zooming in, you're not sure which one you're gonna get, and and then when you like, I feel like myself cheering like internally when I see like the movie I wanted you to pick gets picked.
Like, yay, you finally chose that. We're like, oh, so close.
I know. I was like, oh, I just missed it. He just missed it. And it's like, I love looking at those edits, because I'm always looking to see all the little posters really fast, to see what you got there.
Well, that's the thing is, that initially that conceit was invented for the first two films of In Search of Darkness to basically show that I know that there's so many more movies than we could talk about. And I know, you know, as an audience knows that as well. So at first it was, there's no way we're going to be able to get to everything. So I want to at least acknowledge that we know they're out there. Or if you wanted to know what else is that out there that we haven't covered, you could look to that poster wall and see some of the other titles. And, you know, maybe it's obvious, maybe it's not, but, you know, a little hack, a little secret is you don't have to hit pause with the poster wall. What you could do is you could look at the credits, and I list all the posters.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did. Yeah, well, I'm waiting for my copy with my credit in it because you know, because of course I ordered everything you make. I'm always part of the Kickstarter, which we'll make sure we touch later. But
yeah, and that's always appreciated.
But yeah, I always make sure I always buy the whatever the tier is with the Blu-ray and the poster and all that, because I have about like, I have them all sit there. I have that, you know, I have my two on my Blu-ray monolith, the previous two. I'm going to have this one. I'm going to have In Search of Darkness 3, of course. Pretty much anything that has your name on it, it's going to be on that shelf. I'm telling you, because you always do such an amazing job with that. And so,
thank you.
Here's a specific topic, not on the movie per se, but it's something that like we kind of touched on it with like that we always discuss in movies. But this is more of like because, you know, we're like kind of like these kindred spirits of geekdom, you, me, and Tim, who couldn't be here tonight, but to talk about it. But so
shout out to Tim. Shout out to Tim.
We, you know, and this is something that is debated across every movie ever, and that's the time travel aspect, right? I even actually took a class. I ended up dropping it because it wasn't what I thought it would be. It was a time travel class.
Interesting.
Yeah, at San Francisco State, but they went into like all the scientific like things with it, and it was funny because the teacher kind of reminded me of like an older version of Olivia Newton-John, so it kind of distracted me a little bit. So I really wasn't picking up.
You had Xanadu thoughts, and you started daydreaming,
I expected her to start roller. Yeah, I expected her to start roller skating out with like a laser beam behind her, but yeah, so like with the thing about time travel is like, you know, so what it's, you know, movies have their own time travel rules. Some of them are interesting. Some of them, what do you think? Like, I mean, this is more of a personal question. I just want to think, which do you think, what movie kind of does it the best? And what are your thoughts on like how you think it should be portrayed in a movie?
Well, I think it's, I'm not a stickler. I just want to have a good story and be entertained. That being said, you do have to just sort of adhere to some sort of logic, so you don't like, you know, throw me out of my mindset of just suspending my disbelief in the first place. And I'm actually going to mention a movie that is from 1979. That's Time After Time.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah,
I'm a huge fan. That's probably the first time travel movie that I saw that I really, really connected to in terms of like how it could be used and the mystical, magical purpose of it, because time travel, it really wasn't about time travel, but it was an amazing tool to create this wonderful chase across time and fish out of water. It's, you know, Nicholas Meyer, who went on to direct, you know, Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, and, you know, wrote Star Trek IV, directed Star Trek VI, and so much other amazing stuff. That's the movie that put him on my radar. And I truly believe Malcolm McDowell was H.G. Wells. I truly believed that David Warner was Jack the Ripper. And it was exciting. You know, he goes from, you know, here's the thing though, it's a bit of a time, there's a time and space thing. So
yeah,
what's different from the time machine where you stay static in one place as time moves around you. Yeah. And I'm a huge fan of that story as well. You know, the H.G. Wells classic and the George Pal movie, of course, is my favorite. But yeah, they somehow end up in San Francisco.
Yeah, well, Time After Time.
The logic was they moved it to San Francisco to an H.G. Wells museum,
right?
So somehow his temporal, you know, spirit moved over there over 100 years or whatever it was.
And that was such an HBO mainstay. That was like one of those movies, you know, like growing up when we did, you know, when cable was your really source of watching repeated movies.
Right.
That was such an HBO mainstay to the point of where I every time that was on, it was one of those ones that were on there. And then it was funny. There was not to go into too specifics, I know you we're not spoiling anything with the documentary, but like one of the movies, if this is okay to mention, but you had
you can mention stuff. I just don't want to get too spoilery.
Okay. So you mentioned you have in there a sequence with the final countdown, which I used to watch that movie, but the funny story with that is, and this is kind of, will probably you'll get a kick out of this story. So when a movie became from the theater and it finally made it to HBO, was like a big deal back then. And I remember my dad had cable, and it was when HBO was only on from like, wasn't even 24 hours. It was only on from like 6 a.m. to like, I think midnight or something.
Early days.
Yeah. Yes. And Airplane, which I had already seen in the theater. My mom took me to see it in the theater. So, but I was like, when it came back on cable, I was so excited to see it again. So my dad hadn't seen it and I wanted to watch it with him. And I knew it was on at 8:00 that night. And we had a whole plan. We're going to sit down, watch the movie, do popcorn, the whole thing. But I was convinced that HBO was going to surprise everyone and put it on during the day. Well, back then, HBO didn't really have the library it has now. So I remember, I think the final countdown came on 3 times.
Really?
All 3 times, just because I did not want to leave the TV screen, because in case HBO decided to sneak and put Airplane on ahead of schedule.
So you ended up seeing that multiple times.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, the final countdown is Kirk Douglas is he's the captain of an aircraft carrier, goes through a time vortex back in time to the day or right before the Pearl Harbor attack. And it's a great movie.
It's great. It's a great premise,
It's conceptual. Yeah. What do you do? What would you do if you had all the might and the firepower of contemporary, naval hardware? But what happens if you thwart Pearl Harbor, right? Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, no, and it's great. And so many times that like dilemma is featured in other movies, but like that one was so I don't remember it being in too many at that time, but well, at least for me, like I hadn't seen it until that point. So you saw it after with like other movies, like or there was that famous Twilight Zone. I think it was the 80s version, or no, it might have been the 2000 like that newer version with Forrest Whitaker when he did that. Where Katherine Heigl could go back in time and could she kill Hitler? And it was like, it was always those dilemmas. Like, do you do that? Like, but what else could happen in history? If you
my favorite stories, and this is just sort of a general statement. I don't have a very specific example, but it's the ones where you have that opportunity to go back and you get to kill Hitler, and then you do. But everything happens the way it's supposed to happen anyway.
Right.
Like in terms, like you can't stop history, even if you feel like you can control it, And so there's like 2 different, ripple effects. There's the dark timeline of Back to the Future too, where all of a sudden, Biff is like Trump and so on and so forth. And, there's that dark timeline element, where it's radically different and it's a parallel thing. Or, you try and change things, but you can't. You just make, a bit of a dent, but it doesn't change anything. So, Hitler dies, but Himmler steps in and World War II and all the terrible things still continue. You kill kill Hitler as a baby and someone else just steps in that you never even expected, because I like the idea that you feel like you can control it, especially with the conceit of time travel. But in the end, there's time as just Mother Nature, as just a higher force, ultimately will always prevail. And that to me is kind of cool.
Yeah, no, it is. And now all the young kids are like, oh, that's old stuff. This is all about the multiverse now, But which
that's
is cool
too,
Yeah, it is cool too. Yeah,
dimensions and universes.
We got both. We're lucky. We grew up with both. Now we get like the multiverse, and we got all that cool stuff in there. But so what? So here's another thing. So I mean, it's not like they ever stopped making science fiction and fantasy movies. Obviously, they're still being made today. But what do you think it was? I mean, we kind of touched on this earlier, but what do you think specifically it was about those 80s ones that made them so beloved and so nostalgic in a way, other than just the time period itself, but just there was just something different about them that, that's in comparison to movies today. What do you think just is that difference?
I think it was a pivotal time. We're talking about a time right after, there was sort of this seismic change in movies in terms of entertainment, in the wake of Star Wars and Close Encounters, and Jaws,
Yep.
really. Jaws, Star Wars, and then Close Encounters. So you got to count Spielberg twice.
Yep.
But these are the movies that everyone looked to and saw, holy crap, these make a massive amount of money. Everyone's flocking to this. So now we have to do the same thing in some way, shape, or form. So it sort of changed the way people were making, everyone started swinging for the fences. But hand in hand with that, at the same time, you have the creation of ILM, and you have these visual effects where people are realizing that they have the tools at their disposal to make these movies and these grand visions and these sort of stories of imagination within a quote unquote more reasonable budget, sometimes better than others. I think that's really why the 80s really is sort of this one compact decade of amazing filmmaking, because it really goes down to the visual effects and the advanced special effects and practical effects that match the imagination of the storytellers. And ideally, if you had a budget to match all of that, you could achieve that. If you didn't have the budget, you still had to be more imaginative, like the Roger Cormans of the world with Battle Beyond the Stars and Galaxy of Terror and things like that. But they still achieved it all.
Yeah.
And that combined, I won't keep on going too long about it, but you have to include the VHS explosion.
Yeah.
And the video and bypassing the studios to go direct to video. Anyone can make a movie practically if you could raise the funds and make it yourself. You didn't have to get massive theatrical distribution and marketing. And so now everybody was trying to make their Star Wars or their Alien or whatever have you, their Back to the Future. And so we got just a shitload of good stuff and bad stuff, and not so good stuff. But it's like eating junk food, it's like it all looks good. You eat some and the first couple bites are delicious, but by the end you kind of feel sick to your stomach. That's kind of what the 80s was.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, though, because some of those, especially that you mentioned, some of those still hold up. Like I just recently watched, it was a few months ago, Close Encounters just happened to come on cable and I watched it. And I remember it was one of the movies I was obsessed with as a kid. I remember I saw it in the theater, I was blown away. I had the soundtrack I would always listen to. And that was like, and I'm like, why? And so I watched it again. I'm like, it's amazing how this is still impressing me years later, where we could have millions of different effects that could have done all this, but still it just shows that something about the way they did that film was so well done. Richard Dreyfuss, of course, is a key. His character was just great in it. And just this, I think it was almost like the simplicity mixed with the emerging effects together just created something magical so many times. I think
Spielberg capitalized on these great stories of these everyman type characters, whether it's Roy Neary, by Richard Dreyfuss playing Roy Neary, or in Jaws, you have these non-fishermen, you have a cop, getting out, who gets seasick getting on a boat because he has to, that kind of thing. Against these larger forces of nature, or like a bigger canvas. So it's like a small story with a huge canvas. And I think that's how you can relate to these stories, is because once it gets going and the effects are just insane and huge, you connect with it more because the people are still relatable. And that's why like a movie like Ghostbusters is a really great thing, because the ghost stuff is really great, and it just becomes, the canvas just becomes huge by the end. It's Armageddon, and we see it, but it's nothing without caring about these three schlumps who go into business, and need to recruit a fourth guy just because business is booming and it's the wrong kind of business. No,
it's like they don't, like, even like the new Ghostbusters, which I happen to love. It just, Tim and I were talking about it. We were saying it still didn't have the same thing, because the original Ghostbusters was like a true comedy with the elements of sci-fi and fantasy in there. This one was just kind of did more pure nostalgia, and kind of, it didn't really have the comedy as the base of it as much. It had some in there. Of course, Paul Rudd, you're gonna get some laughs always, but
Paul Rudd. Well, I admired a lot about it. If if you ask me, I admired a lot about it, but I was a bit disappointed. Not because it didn't have X, Y, or Z that everyone's expecting, but I felt like Paul Rudd was the only one who knew that it was a comedy, and no one, no one else around him did. And
that's what it was. The comedy wasn't there as much as it was,
and the disparity of that too. That's the thing, is it because everything they do by the first half is doing its best to be an original story. Second half, it's doing everything it can to bring you back to the happiness and nostalgia of the original. And the more that happened and the more nostalgia that came my way, the more I kept on thinking to myself, where's the comedy here?
Yeah.
Where are the laughs that the first one had? And, tis what it is,
Yeah. But I mean, it's still it progressed the story, though, at least, it was the proper, I think, progression if you just look at the story.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it was there's definitely something there's definitely a tonal shift that is extremely noticeable if you're a big fan of the franchise. But
it was very cool, that Ivan Reitman, was producing this. Jason Reitman, his son, is passing the torch along, from generation to generation, keeping it in the family, so to speak, which I thought was very cool. And Ivan Reitman is in Search of Tomorrow. And,
that was a little sad to see, just because of just his recent
that's the
passing.
thing. It was a real, that was a real shock to me. He was so gracious to invite me to his place in Montecito. When I say place, it's like this palatial estate. It's insane. It's the house that Ghostbusters built and all those other amazing films. But he was just a really great guy. So
and that was what I was gonna say. It's like, he's obviously, he's much older than he was back when he did those movies, but like when he talks about him, there's just a youthfulness to like in your documentary. You can see that he's like a kid again talking about this stuff, which shows that why his films were so loved, because he loved them, and I think it totally translated to the audience that, hey, if I'm going to give you something I love, you're probably going to love it too, just for that reason. So
and he and he was involved with a bunch of other stuff that we cover in the film that he produced or executive produced. Heavy Metal, Space Hunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone. His resume has, even Twins, his resume has a lot more sci-fi on there than you think it does.
Yeah, there was not to be, I know you don't want to give specifics, but there was a line in there that cracked me up when you talked about they said, why were those titles so long at that point?
Right.
It was like that with the destruction of Jared Sin was that Metal Storm and that. And I was just laughing at too. I'm like, what is it? Just so they could get more 3D letters coming out at you? Is that?
I don't know. Someone did it and everyone else said, oh, you could do that. Well, great. We don't have to cut this down anymore.
Yeah, like to just make it as long as can be. Yeah. Well, what's that one that Tim watched? It was something like the guy that fought Bigfoot and then killed something.
Right.
I forgot the name of the time. I can't even remember it. It's so long, but yeah. But that was,
I'll stick with it's a mad world.
Yeah, that's I think that's long enough. Yeah. So I know we asked this before, and we kind of touched on it a little bit. And I know you said, like, if this does well, you'll make a third one. Though, are there any kind of other like ideas you might have for mega docs? I mean, I know we kind of touched on some, but there's one I think that like has got to be one you do that I'll throw my proverbial suggestion.
Well, this is the In Search of Podcasts, right?
Yes. Well, that one, of course, yeah, that one too. But I also have, I think there's got to be something like a, I know I've seen there's all these little like shows featuring it, but like the 80s toys and stuff like that. I would love to see one of that, like in search of Toys R Us. I don't know what would you call it, but I don't know if you can get the rights anymore, but yeah, like that would be cool. Just seeing all just 5 hours of nostalgic toys. I think I would.
Sure. Well, I do have to throw props to, the toys that made us. I think
that's a great show.
That's a really great show. And I love the way that they focus on, a specific toy line, whether it's Mego or Barbie or, G.I. Joe. I really connect with that stuff, and I think those stories are always very interesting. And we're aiming at decades and genres ultimately, and so we're percolating in the kitchen, so to speak. We've got In Search of Darkness 90s,
Oh,
We'd like to
wow.
do, and we want to do In Search of Darkness 70s as well.
Oh my God. Oh,
And
Tim's not here, but I think he would have his jaw would have dropped. He's a big 70s horror fan. So
yeah, we get, the icons of the 70s are not as prevalent as they are in the 90s, but we'll find a way to get that done in the same way that we've been doing the other In Search of Darkness movies. But and fantasy, so we've got In Search of Legends, and that's in the beginning stages as well, and that's everything from Conan the Barbarian to Krull to The Never-Ending Story to Dark Crystal, all the great stuff, all the fantasy stuff that we love.
Yeah, I basically, if I see a project that says David Weiner and In Search of, you've got my money. I'm telling you right now. I'm on board. So,
although maybe I should do like a whole thing about Leonard Nimoy's In Search of, and I'll just call it In Search of, In Search of. What do you think?
Because everyone knows the Bigfoot one. That's everyone's favorite. That's the one everyone remembers.
The Bigfoot one and the Loch Ness Monster are the two big ones, right?
They know the cryptid ones because I think it's just, and his voice of just In Search of, like that. I can't. That sounded more like Sulu, but I can't do a good Leonard Nimoy. But those shows are great. Was it Tim that told me he found somewhere where it had every episode of that, like on somewhere?
The magic of YouTube, you can find that stuff.
But it was like a whole, like someone had them all collected into one channel or something like that. I gotta dig that up. That's primed for a Blu-ray box set, I think.
Right, and that was like that's another, just there's so many facets of our childhood where I think so many of these that might have planted the appreciation for this kind of stuff. Maybe not, maybe that's a stretch, or maybe that's a bold statement, but I mean, maybe for me at least, because it's about the content that you love, yet it's a sort of a docu-series or docu-entertainment that's informing you, yet you're totally intrigued because it's not like, much as I love Ken Burns, the Civil War does not excite me as much as Sasquatch.
Yes, I'm the same way. It's
so
I love all kinds of history, but you're going to give me a choice on what to watch. I'm leaning towards the cryptids and the Sasquatch, but so we're gonna probably should wrap things up, but I want to give you, of course, now the chance to kind of let all our listeners know where they can find it and order it. The different Kickstarter things that are going on, and
we crowdfunded it back in the day. We did Kickstarter, and then we did Indiegogo. Now the movie is done. It's completely done, and you can buy it, and you can get it now if you go to 80sci-fi.com. So 80s, 80sci-fi.com, and all our socials are 80s at 80sci-fi on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And you can order the movie. And if you order the movie before March 27th, which is our cutoff point, you get to have your name in the credits. How cool is that? And if you want,
Civil Gore's in all of them. I made sure our name is in every one of these.
Put your podcast, put your lover, your cat, whatever you want to do, and immortalize them. And then exclusive 3 very, very cool posters, and you can choose your DVD or your Blu-ray. You get a slipcase. There's like a sticker pack. We have a whole Discord, community where we do watch parties every week. It's what's cool about what we do is that it's not like you crowdfund a movie and then you wait for it to happen. If you are interested, although this is the tail end of In Search of Tomorrow, we're just giving it to you now when you buy it. The other, In Search of Darkness, all these other projects, you're in on the ground floor, and you get to talk to the filmmakers, and you get to commiserate with fellow fans with watch parties and quarterly meetings, or however often we get to. But we pull back the curtain on our process, and we also involve our audience. And what do you want to watch? What movies do you want to see? What do you want us to cover? What chapters do you want us to talk about? We have your say and participate and be part of it as we make the film. And I think that's pretty unique and fun. And we do this all ourselves. We're a small company, Creator VC. The reason why you can't get it, on iTunes and streaming and stuff like that is because we make and manufacture the stuff ourselves. So go to 80sci-fi.com, and you just got to get there before March 27th.
Yep. It's funny too. I was gonna say, I thought, well, two things. One, now I thought of a cool slogan for you guys. We're like the small company, but the big docs, because but what I was gonna say was too is that
got to put you on the marketing team right away.
Yeah, sure. You know me, I can talk. But, what I was gonna say too is that's what's so great about, I think, these things, because as someone who's like, I haven't even been able to participate in a fraction of what I want to with the different watch parties and stuff. But yeah, when you start, like, and I've helped crowdfund all of them, and I have to say, it's like you get so much out of it. You get so much information, and you actually feel like you're a part of the process. So when you get this thing, you might see your name in the credits because okay, so you ordered that tier, but you really feel like you're part of it because you're so inclusive to everybody that's part of it, because it's kind of like it's a gift to them, to the watchers, and the viewers of it. And it's because it's being made by someone who is just like them, and someone who loves all that. And that's very unique. And that's what I think makes all your documentaries and your whole company there special.
By the fans, for the fans. We really feel that way because, we are not the Hollywood elite. We might have, a toe in the Hollywood pool to get access to the people that you want in our documentaries. But other than that, we're just hardcore fans, and we love this stuff as much as you guys. And I think by having a pulse on what the fans want, because it's what we would want, we make the movies that we want to see as well. I think people can sort of, they can test the mettle of the things that we do and understand that, it comes from a genuine place in our hearts versus our wallets, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So thank you again, though. This has been awesome. It's always a pleasure to get to talk to you, especially because I knew it's funny. Tim was like, I think we're going to make this the whole, just make the interview the episode, because it's going to be a nice, long, fun episode. And I said, well, when we start talking,
long chats,
you become a good friend to us, and we've always just between chatting online, chatting on the podcast, it's always like one of our favorite segments when you get to come on like this, and we just get to catch up and talk movies and talk all things 80s and basically all the things we love, you love, it seems. So it's really cool.
Well, it's fun. That's the thing, is we could bounce this stuff off of each other and we know what we're talking about. You know? I sit at the dinner table and I get blank faces and I have to explain all my pop culture references. So it's more refreshing than you may realize.
Yeah. Well, we're always here when you need to bounce that off. So we always get your memes and your references. I'm always enjoyed by following your Twitter and Instagram. So
thanks. Yeah,
that's great.
It came from blog.
Yes. Oh yeah. We'll put that all. I'll make sure Tim puts all that in the show notes so everyone could follow you and enjoy it as well. So
cool.
But
cool.
Yeah. So thanks again. It was great to talk to you again, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate it, and always a pleasure. And next time, right, In Search of Darkness, in October, we'll be coming around the mountain again.
I cannot wait.